playing it wrong, and I taught it wrong for years, but Yesterday is my favorite Beatles song, and it has been since pretty much when it came out. It's the first song that I ever performed. Now, there are better Beatles songs. I'm not saying it's the best Beatles song. I'm just saying it's my favorite Beatles song. And I think it's because I have some sentimentality around it, being that, like I said, it was the first song I ever performed. When I was 7 years old in the second grade, we had a talent show, and I put together I guess you could call it a male chorus, about 7 or 9 friends, and we sang Yesterday along with an instrumental album. I don't know what album it was, I don't know what the instrumental, but it was an instrumental version of Yesterday. So this would put it, this was, if I was 7 years old, this would have been about 1968. Now the song was recorded in 65. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the song, and then I'm going to kind of show you how I taught it and why I taught it that way for so long, and then actually how it's played. I'll show you the chords that Paul actually used. But I did 2 things wrong when it comes to teaching this song. And also in the process of learning this song, you're going to learn a new tuning that you maybe never thought of before. It's a very obvious tuning and very common. It's not very common, but it's a pretty easy tuning to do. So and to play with, it's very easy to play with. So okay, now Paul actually dreamed this song. He says that he woke up one morning, and in 1964, kind of right at the beginning of Beatlemania, or at the height of Beatlemania in the UK, he woke up one morning and he had this song in his head, and he thought that it was something he'd heard before. He thought it was like, no, there's no way that this melody could be original. There's just no way I would just dream something like that. Now, he lived at the Asher family home. He lived there for several, I think 2 or 3 years. In fact, pretty much throughout Beatlemania, he lived at the home of his girlfriend's family, Jane Asher. And I actually recently talked to Peter Asher about this. Peter and Paul shared the top floor of the Asher family home, and Paul loved living there because the Ashers, were both, I think both parents were doctors, and they would play word games at night after dinner and everything. So they really enjoyed, he really enjoyed being around all of that. And a couple years later, when all the Beatles moved out to the country, Paul stayed in London. And it's part of the reason Beatles got experimental was because Paul was going to art gallery openings and art shows and music, seeing a lot of music and stuff like that. And the rest of the Beatles had all bought houses out in the country to save taxes, save on taxes. So it's kind of interesting. But so Paul had this song that he wrote. There was a piano in his bedroom that he shared. Like I said, there was another room that Peter stayed in and Paul stayed in. And Paul sat down at the piano that morning. He plucked out the chords, and he even says he could have gone the wrong way with the chords. Initially originally on the piano he played it in G major, and he said, "Oh, I could have totally done Yesterday." Oh my goodness. He could have gone in a different direction. He said it would have never become a song that it was. Now there's a little bit of a conflict here. Paul thinks that he recorded it just a couple years after he wrote it. I mean, a couple months after he wrote it. But everybody else seems to think that song was around for about a year, and Paul was driving everybody crazy because he was saying, "Is this original?" And he would sing it and say, that's got to be something else. That pre-exists, right? That was somebody else's song. And there have been a couple musicologists that came along and pegged a couple songs that maybe Paul had heard that kind of fed into the melody, but they're not close enough to be copyright infringement at all. So a lot of his friends, in fact, even I think Lester, the director of Help and Hard Day's Night, he said if Paul didn't stop playing the song, he would get rid of the piano in the studio that they were filming in. So Paul was like, okay, whatever. And so eventually, and of course, everybody knows that originally Paul had the title as Scrambled Eggs. Scrambled eggs, how I really love your legs, and something like that. As he just kind of was joking around about it. And finally, on a trip, he was sitting in the back seat with Jane Asher, and a friend was driving them around Portugal. They were going from, I guess, the airport to the place they were staying at. And he sat in the back seat and wrote the lyrics on an envelope. And he came up with the lyrics for Yesterday. And he talks about, you know, why he chose the word and everything like that. But it's funny because I also thought, I wrote a song, I've got a song out that I just released, my first release, technically, my first solo release, called Question Mark, and it's kind of a gypsy jazz thing, and I had to send it to a lot of my friends, particularly my friends who had a real affinity for old-time music, because it definitely sounds like something from the 30s or 40s, and so I sent my song Question Mark to a lot of different people to see if I plagiarized it, and nobody said it sounded like anything in particular. So that was good, but I totally understand where Paul's coming from, because if you write something and you think, oh, this is amazing, it's got to be someone, somebody else wrote this. So, but that's not the case. Okay, so now technically it's the Beatles' first solo song. If you listen to the anthology version, okay, there's only 2 takes of this. He actually got it down. He recorded it live with a Epiphone Texan guitar, and he played it mic'd and vocals and guitar at the same time. They replaced the vocal later, a couple days later, the day that they recorded the strings. I forget the date, but it was like the 14th, and then on the 17th they recorded the strings and redid the vocal. And you can still hear a little bit of the original vocal coming through the guitar mic, which is always a problem when you record the guitar and the voice at the same time. Very difficult to separate those and replace one or the other. But they managed to make it work. The anthology version, though, if you listen to it, Paul is telling George what chords he's playing. Oh, I'm in G, but I'm actually playing F. And I'm going to explain that in a second, what he did there. But they kind of decided, well, you know, Ringo's like, I can't play anything on this, and electric guitar didn't seem right, and George Martin just said, just record it solo, and then we'll figure out what to do with it. And so technically it's the first solo Beatles song. Years later, Paul wanted to, because he wrote everything on this without any collaboration. He wrote the lyrics and the melody and the chords and everything. And he even collaborated with George Martin on the string arrangement. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But he went to Yoko in 2001 and asked if he could change the authorship on Yesterday. Instead of being Lennon-McCartney, if he could change it to McCartney-Lennon. And she said no. And ultimately, they didn't speak for years after that. He was a little upset about that. But so Paul recorded it, and what he did was, again, he originally on a piano, he was playing it in G. There are some videos of them playing it live with a band in Germany. You can look those up, and they're playing in G. But for the recording, he tuned it down to D standard, okay? So I'm in E standard. That's what guitars are tuned in. Eat at Denny's, get bad eggs, okay? E, A, D, G, B, E. And what he did was he tuned every string down a whole step. That way when he played G, it was really F. So it could be in a lower key. So I've got my Gibson Dove tuned in, hopefully. It's probably going to move a little bit here, but yeah, you can hear it right away, right? And you know, that open D note should have been my first clue that I was teaching it wrong. I was teaching it in F. Now, again, I'm going to go back to my other guitar, and I'm going to tell you why I taught it in F. Okay, when you're a guitar teacher, one of the hardest things to do is to find songs that you can teach students that take them through a progression of difficulty. You know, the first song I might teach might be Peter Gunn, because it's all played on one string, and it can use all 4 fingers. So it's a great little exercise and a great way to walk out of your first lesson with a song under your belt. And I always wanted to do that with students to kind of give them some encouragement. But I would always also teach them, like, okay, here's how you read tablature, and maybe I might show them how to read it in music too, so they can see, oh, well, that's not that difficult. Well, that makes sense. And they're learning several things when they're learning one thing. Okay, well, I always thought Yesterday was an F, and it was played like this, using basically F bar chord, E minor, A7. Well, that F bar chord and then that subsequent B flat chord and even the G minor chord, that and even the C chord, which you could play like this instead of like this, that made it a much more difficult song and not a song I could teach to beginners. So I used the song to teach players that were ready, students that were ready for bar chords, and they're ready for that F chord. It might be 6 months into their lesson, it might be 3 months, it depends on the student. It might be a year into their lessons, but it gave me a great song to teach them that everybody knew. In fact, it's the Beatles' most covered song. It's one of the top 3 most covered songs of all time. Yesterday is. There's more cover recordings of it than any other song. So the reason I taught it that way was to give myself a good song that I could use as a tool to teach bar chords. The thing is, changing a guitar from standard tuning, from E standard to D standard. So what D standard is just every string down a whole step. So instead of eat at Denny's, get bad eggs, I didn't prepare something for this, but it's D, I'm going to just tune it as I talk, G, C instead of D, G down to F, B down to A. And the strings are going to be a little looser, they're going to be a little squishier, they might bend out of tune a little bit. See it? Yep, I'm going a little sharp. Okay, and now you'll notice it's just a regular G chord. However, the next chord that Paul does, when he hits that open lower bottom string, which is a D note, which should have, like I said, should have been my first clue that he was tuned down when you hear that. He goes to F sharp minor shape, but this is actually E minor. And then he plays, if you watch him play it, he plays this B7 chord here. Okay, he doesn't play a bar B7 chord. And then he goes to E minor shape, D over, so this is E minor shape, but it's actually D minor, F over C, and then C shape, which is B flat, and then he goes to D7. I never noticed that he was playing his 7th chord there. I always taught major because I always thought 7th chords were too hokey, so I never used them. And then now I listen to it and I'm going, oh my gosh, the 7th chord's totally there. Okay, and then G to E minor, which is D minor, to A shape, which is actually G major, and then C, F. So the only bar chord in Paul's version is here, except when is there. And when they play it live a couple times in Germany and stuff, they're playing in G. So that's the only time he plays a bar chord is that F sharp. Okay, now I taught it wrong 2 ways. One was I taught the wrong voicings or the wrong chord shapes for the song, but I also taught the pattern wrong. The right hand pattern that he uses, and I did the same thing when I taught Blackbird. I didn't notice. I was classically trained, so I was always using my fingers for things. So when I played Yesterday, I would do thumb and then 3 fingers. But what Paul did is thumb and then he kind of brushed with his first finger. And you can get the sound better. Now, if you listen to the anthology version, which is the first take of it, he does a more back and forth kind of thing with his index finger. I know I'm getting really inside baseball here, I'm sorry. But it's just, to me, it's just fascinating because it's all part of what made this song my favorite song. But if you listen to his, the first take of it, he did more of an 8th note thing. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, like that, he did. He did a little brushy thing. He's doing down, up, down, up, down. And that's reminiscent of how he would play Blackbird, which I also taught more of like classical. He would do more of that kind of slapping thing. So it's interesting, but then the second take he settled on keeping it more simple. it's just amazing to me. His playing is so good, and his singing is so good. It's not perfect, but it's amazing, you know, how seasoned they were even then. This was 1965, I think March 1965 is when he recorded it. And so George Martin thought, well, you know, we should add a string quartet to this. And so Paul was like, oh, I don't know. He really didn't want it to be Mantovani sounding, you know, really schmaltzy. And so he said, well, we could do a string quartet, which a string quartet generally, and in this case, is 2 violins, 1 viola, and a cello. And he said, only if they don't use any vibrato. And that was probably pretty hard for them to do, because vibrato is a very natural thing for string players to do, because remember, they don't have frets. And one way of kind of hiding tuning deficiencies is to put a lot of vibrato on it. Singers do it all the time. If they're going to be a little out of tune, if you put a lot of vibrato on it, then you're going to find that you don't notice that you're out of tune so much. But when string players have to play without vibrato, it can be difficult. So that was one of the things he insisted on. And then one of the other things they did. Now I've heard conflicting things on this. I think I read in George Martin's "All You Need Is Ears," his autobiography that he wrote, that they close mic'd each instrument. Normally they would just set up a mic or 2 mics. You know, they were starting to get into stereo in the 60s, so they would set up a couple mics. But I thought I read somewhere that they close mic'd it. So they may have just used 2 mics and brought it really close. Or they might have, when I read that, I read it as everybody had their own mic. Now, I also know they wanted them to use headphones, but string players aren't really used to using headphones, especially back then, and they didn't want to do it. So they actually had to put the song on in the speakers. So in the microphones from the string session, you can hear Paul singing and playing the song, and that was how they played along with it. That wasn't uncommon to do that, but it wasn't the most efficient way to get clean tracks. When they were doing the mixes for the Vegas Cirque du Soleil Love, they really could hear Paul coming through the speakers on the string mics, and they were wondering, can we use this? But they actually used them to great effect. So then one of the other things too was that Paul wrote some of the lines and stuff that were being played, and there's a spot where in the B section, let's see, why she Paul wanted that E flat over the. Now we're in the key of F. There is no E flat in the key of F, and George Martin was like, I don't know, Paul. That's not really correct. And Paul's like, no, that's what I hear. That's what I want. And so that's what they wrote in the arrangement. And George Martin later admitted, he goes, yeah, Paul was right. He goes, because keep in mind, George Martin was a trained musician. He wanted to be a classical musician. That's not where his career turned out, but he was training to be that. So he was very trained as a musician, which allowed him to kind of introduce a lot of things like orchestra stuff and different instruments to the Beatles. But it allowed him to hear keyboard arrangements and things like that. And that was one of the things that, that was one of the things that Paul hit there and then. Okay, so let me just show you the chords real quick. I'll put them over here over my right shoulder here. And just so you know, so the tuning again is D, and I'm going to fine tune it before I go any further. D, it wants to go sharp. It really does. D, G, C, F, A, and D. Everything you play on D standard, anything you can play in E standard, you can play in D standard. So that's now, but it's just down a whole step. So everything I play on this, if I play like I would, everything's going to be down a whole step, okay? That's the only thing. So D standard doesn't require you to learn any new chords, but you're going to need to learn the new names of the chords that you already know. All right, and that's what's going to happen here, because my brain's going to fart, I guarantee it. I'm going to forget what chord I'm playing for a second, and I may say it wrong. So the first chord is a G shape, but it's F, okay? And then Paul goes to an F sharp minor bar chord, but that's actually E minor, okay? Then we're going to do what looks like a B7, okay, but it's actually A7. And then we're going to go to E minor, but it's actually D minor. And you might play the fourth string. And I see them sometimes play the F over C this way. G over D is what it looks like, but it actually is F over C. And then C shape, which is B flat, D7, which is C7. Boy, so confusing. Then G shape, which is F. G over F sharp, which is F over E. D minor, which is E minor shape. Then the A shape, which is G. And then C shape to G shape, which is really B flat to F, okay? And then the B section, oh sorry, I messed up. So it's F sharp minor, and then B7, which is really E minor, A7, and then if you're following along on piano, and then E minor shape, which is D, but you could do I think you could play just the top four strings on that, and then, so you have that nice descending line. And so it's E minor, then technically D minor, F over C, B flat, F over A, and then G minor, which is A minor shape, and then D7, and then G. And it does that again. And then again, like I said, I taught it wrong for years, at first accidentally and then on purpose. I realized probably about 10 years into teaching that, oh wait, he's tuned down a whole step. I just didn't think they would do that. That didn't occur to me that would be a thing. But it's if you're a guitar teacher, Yesterday's a great song to introduce bar chords. It's frustrating as heck, but it's a great song, and if the person has their guitar set up, it's not horribly difficult. It was released as a single in the US, but not in the UK. In the UK, Paul said they were kind of embarrassed about it. It was like not a rock song, and they didn't want to release it, so they included it on Help. But my version of Help, my album that I have, was the first album I ever bought, okay, with my own money. I saved up a quarter a week allowance for a very long time to buy that record. That album in the US did not have Help on it. Did not have Yesterday on it. It came out on Yesterday and Today, and so, but it came out as a single, and then later came out on that compilation record of Yesterday and Today, which had a bunch of singles on it. So anyway, I hope this was as interesting. I hope this was interesting. I don't know. I'm a big Beatles fan. I wouldn't be playing guitar if it wasn't for the Beatles. I want to do some more videos about the Beatles. If you like these, let me know. I've got a couple more ideas about the Beatle videos that I could do. I could do probably a Beatle video on 15 different songs as I think about them. So anyway, if you find this was interesting, if you like this, let me know, and I will do some more of these. But thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and check out all my other videos. If you're a guitar player, I've got videos all over the place. You check out my playlist. You can see different things from finger picking patterns to strumming patterns to open tunings to pro guitar type secrets and things like that. Also gear reviews. I don't do many of those, but I may do more of those in the future. Send me some gear and I'll review it. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. God bless you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.